Hi everyone, I'm Saranya, founder of the Bombay Poetry Crawl, and in today's episode, I had the absolute privilege of interviewing Pooja Ashok Kumar. Pooja runs Bombay Tamil History. I don't even know how to capture all of its multiplicities. It's a moment, I would say. It's an expression. It's a interrogation into the history of Bombay's Tamil migrant communities. And what's incredible is that she does this by focusing on the various intersections of these migrations, especially those that have to do with labor, caste, class, religious differences, gender and sexuality, and ethnicities. And going on a walk that Pooja conducts in Dharavi is it's such an enriching experience because she actually has you talk to people and meet people. And throughout this episode, we find out how people are such a crucial part of her work. She's a researcher, an artist, a writer, an ethnographer, and more than anything, she's a lovely friend of mine, and I respect her work so much. So, through this episode, we talk about various Tamil populations that have migrated to Bombay, the history of these migrations, the story behind Dharavi, the story behind current talks of redevelopment in Dharavi, how labor, caste, class, and gender influence so many ways that Bombay Tamils live their day to day lives. And of course, politics, especially Dravidian politics, which are such a crucial part of any Tamil identity. So, enjoy this super enriching conversation with Pooja. So, hi Pooja, thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed and having this conversation with me. Um, my first question was going to be about yourself and your background in research, but it's also about the story of Bombay Tamil history. And I feel like Bombay Tamil history and probably your experiences are intertwined. So tell me about both.
Hi, Saranya. Thank you so much for having me here, first of all. Thank you for considering me important to be here, to be interviewed, and also like to understand about things I'm doing. Thank you for that. Thank you for the platform. Um, where do I even begin? Okay, so yeah, I am a researcher, if I can put myself into that confinement. I'm a researcher. I have studied history. I have done masters in history. And I'm also an educator, if I can say that. So I've done a bunch of things for kids. I work with Sarmaya Arts Foundation. It's extremely important. It's a stepping stone in my life. Working here, and it has also led me to do what I'm doing right now, pursue what I'm doing right now. So yeah, that's about me. Just in a very small description, I'm saying this. But yes, my project, my personal project, Bombay Tamil History, um, something that I feel is now creating me more than me creating it. I feel like it's redefining me, reshaping me in so many ways. Um, so this whole project actually started as um, just identifying this void in the history of Bombay. So I was just trying to write an article for Sarmaya and about the Tamil community and tanneries and stuff. It was something around, how tanneries are lost now, in leather tanneries are lost. Um, and I was trying to look up at stuff. Actually, this goes even beyond the article. I was just trying to look up something about the Tamil community in Bombay, just trying to research, uh, do some stuff. And I figure that there is no archive as such. Obviously, it's not new. Like, I already knew it, but it felt like a revelation point or something. It also felt very sad in that moment. I felt like, okay, I have been here. I have known my grandparents being here. I know that there were people who came here before them. But how come they are not really recorded anywhere? How
Yeah.
come there's nothing much about them?
Hmm.
Right? So even when I was searching Tamils and Bombay, all that I could see was just some blogs and some articles, mostly on Matunga
The
and
Brahmin community.
the Brahmin community. Yes.
Who also
um,
seem to have hegemony over um, culture from Tamil Nadu, as if it's only Carnatic.
yeah, yeah. That's also why exactly I started this project. Um, to tell people that Tamil does not mean Brahmin, Tamil does not mean Carnatic, Tamil does not mean uh, temples that you see in
Mm.
today's form. It's so much more than that. And so yeah, this kind of began as an emotional seed that was just sown already way back in time when my grandmother was there. I spent a lot of time with her, and she sort of like uh, was this initiator. It's always party initiating you into your self.
Hmm.
The ancestors,
Yeah.
that lineage, they are the ones to remind you of who you are. So, and it all comes back in time. So I grew up around her, and she would always talk about Ur. She would talk about Kovil. She would talk about the market there. She would go to Ur and get things from there just to tell us, like, this is how you get stuff there, and they are so beautiful. You get everything from the world there. She would say that.
Yeah.
And I used to always think, how can she actually find Ur better than Bombay?
Yeah.
Because Bombay city has everything. This I could feel even as a child. But I was very fascinated by her stories. All of that kind of like remained, and it sort of took this shape um, of this project. So this whole project is a homage to my grandmother, to my grandparents. More than my parents, I'm proud of my grandparents. um, Knowing how they came here, where they came from. Um, my grandfather being a mill worker, having zero, resource, education, and managed to live a life, managed to raise my mother, who was adopted by them, um, and give her a good life, education, everything, despite the great strike that despite joblessness that my grandfather had to experience, despite all that, whatever they could give my mother, and then that led to what I could experience over time. uh, I think that's incredible. So I felt like it needs to go down somewhere,
Yeah.
as a tribute. And so actually, this was supposed to be my MPhil topic. Yeah, the whole research about Tamil community, especially political stance here, the Dravidian politics here. That was supposed to be my research, MPhil, and as you know, the government discontinued MPhil. um, and I was like, I was in this phase where I, I wanted to do something larger than just an academic thesis.
Yeah.
I wanted to make something more than just what you would do, like a black book. I didn't want to limit my research to just a black book. So I thought, like, okay, there's no archive yet. Maybe I will create an archive, and I will record stories beginning with my family members and going into the larger community. So it starts with my family, and whenever I'm talking about my project and whatever I talk about, it comes from a very, very humble point. It's not like there's no feeling of entitlement. There's no feeling of, like, I am doing this, or like ego anywhere. It's simply coming from sheer humility. I just want to address the fact that there's a huge gap in Bombay's history, and I'm trying to kind of like fill that up, not in just academic ways, but also beyond that, because these are actual people,
Yeah.
and you can't be studying them as subjects. They need to be experienced, and that's how then the project works. It works as an archive. It works as an experiential walk. It works as a jamming session.
Yeah.
Where like you are, and it works as a festival celebrated
Yeah.
together. It's everything, yeah, mixed up.
So it went from, I mean, it was birthed from years of research and interest, of course. But you said it was the article that you were writing for Sadmaya.
It was actually, that was a turning point. That's
Hmm.
exactly when I felt very strongly that this needs to, this needs to be put out as a whole project,
Huh.
as a whole. It needs to take the physical form now,
Yeah.
digital or physical form now. So then I started, yeah. After that article, I started really kind of working harder on the whole research bit. I was already researching before that. I was already taking interviews of my own people from Dharavi. I was going around everywhere. Basically, wherever I see Tamil, it just
Yeah. I have
it
seen your
sparks
stories. Yeah.
something. Especially in Bombay, right? Because it's that thing, right? Every time you're away from your homeland, your ancestral land, and then you see someone who is familiar,
Yeah.
who speaks a familiar
You
language,
get excited.
get excited so much.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
Urenge.
Yeah.
So seeing Tamil was like a huge motivation everywhere, and I was like, okay, this is something I want to pursue more. I never really thought I would do that, but I felt like my grandmother would say, "என்னதான் வனத்துல அலைஞ்சாலும் கடைசியில எனத்துக்கு வந்துதான் சேரும்."
Oh, beautiful.
Right? Which means literally, no matter how much you roam around the forest, you come back to your own tribe or community. So I feel that happened to me in many ways, and this is not a narcissistic approach at all.
No,
It's
no.
not like I'm not claiming supremacy of Tamils at all.
No,
It's
no.
basically just feeding into this sense of belonging, sense of longing.
Yeah.
It's that diasporic sentiment that most of us keep experiencing
Yeah.
every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that.
And this, I'm really interested in how you spoke about going beyond academia.
Yeah,
I believe you have a background in history,
I do.
and you said you've worked in education and you work at Sadmaya, and like these are such I guess institutional fields.
Yeah,
But Bombay Tamil history is an experience. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. Like, it's like you said, it's festival, it's music, it's walking around, it's meeting people, it's eating, it's all of that. So
Yeah.
how do you connect, or how do you translate or expand from like book knowledge to archiving a live history?
The very fact that I am probably neurodivergent, it really helps.
Mm.
Because when I am writing something, I've also taught in my college.
Okay.
I taught history to second year and third year students. And teaching or reading, obviously, we keep visualizing stuff, right? I would teach Dravidian architecture, and it's within a classroom. I'm not enjoying it. And I know the students are also probably not able to understand what I'm speaking. I'm not sure if they understand what's the Vimana, what's the structure. They need to be experiencing it to understand it better visually, structurally. And so, and that being just a structure, it's still like a tangible, lifeless structure that we are talking about. But then here we are talking about people,
Yeah.
actual moving, thinking, complex human beings,
Yeah.
right? And so how do you really confine them into words and into thesis after thesis? How many papers should I write about them? Like I wrote an article for EPW about my
I've read it.
my grandfather and the entire Andheri Sakinaka belt mills around there, and the community. It's barely known, literally, only because I come from that community. I lived in Jarimari for 10 years of my life. And I've known people there. It's almost like it was another Chinna Tamil Nadu, small Tamil Nadu. And because I had that access, I could write about it, I could go back, I could ask my mother, I could ask my uncle Periyappa, who was a mill worker himself. But um, and they would casually talk about it all the time, right? But this is the first time I'm trying to record them and
Yeah.
like write about them. And so, and he's alive, he's right there. So I'm talking about him in a paper, yes, but it still doesn't do justice. I feel like people need to meet him and hear it from him, right? So that's
And
exactly
his voice.
his voice, yes. Which is why I feel like I can talk endlessly about Dharavi. I can talk endlessly about a place I am documenting, about people, etc. My great uncle who is 91 years old now, I can talk about them endlessly, but I think until they are there in form, people going and meeting them and hearing things from them is a whole different experience.
Yeah.
And that will be there, like that they will remember them more when they experience them. So it all, to me, everything becomes an experience. So I feel like I wanted that in the project as well.
Yeah.
I didn't want to confine it at all to just academia.
Yeah, because it also then limits who gets to access that, who gets to read.
It is unfortunately gate kept a lot as well, but thankfully the trend is changing so much. We know there are people who are ready to kind of work with people and get more voices in, get more stories in, give them access. So that trend is changing, fortunately, which is why we are able to do this, write more, contribute more. And my friend Radhika Saraf, who works at ASAP, um, told this thing once, and that really kind of like helped me relook at things. She was like, please, academia doesn't need, you don't need academia to make yourself credible. If at all, you are actually making academia credible by your stories. So that really kind of helped, because otherwise we keep academia in such a, on such a pedestal, or have to write a paper to make it valid, to make it credible. But yeah, exactly, like who is doing that?
It's still research, it's still important research.
Yeah.
Which also goes to my next question, which is the actual experience of it. I've been lucky enough to attend one of your walks. I came with my sister and we had the best time. I have to say, she doesn't live here, and when she came, I was like, you're lucky you're here at this time. It was last December.
Yeah.
I think it was right before Christmas, and you were hosting one of the walks, and I was like, we have to go. Tell me about creating the work. Tell me about Dharavi. Why this neighborhood? What does it mean to you personally, as a citizen of the city, as a historian, as someone who is Tamil in Bombay?
Yeah, so Dharavi has always been this space where people would not want to go inside a lot, because it's filthy, it's polluted. Gang members live there. A lot of robbery happens there. People are not safe there.
Yeah.
That's the common stigma, and this I've heard from my own family at one point, because yeah, we used to live away from Dharavi. We were never like inside Dharavi. This was always there, and we know, right, how Dharavi is, like the whole neighborhood. I hate calling it a slum neighborhood. I hate restricting it to or confining it to this term slum. Um, so I'm not going to use that. But the neighborhood has been in a form where people never really wanted to go, and also a lot of activities were probably happening there, which made people think that this is not safe enough or whatever. But all of that is still, again, just prejudice. Until you go inside the neighborhood, you experience it yourself, you may not know what's happening in there, right? So I have always had access to Dharavi, because a lot of my relatives live there, my half of my village lives there. So as a child also, I used to go there for a lot of functions. Some marriage is happening, some Tanni Uttara function is happening. So we kept going there, and it didn't strike me then. Like it just felt like a familiar neighborhood because Jarimari was also always a slum neighborhood. So it's the same for me. It never felt like different. But then when I revisited Dharavi as a proper, like, adult, I have never, like, after childhood, I never really went to Dharavi. Never. Like, it was many, many years later when I started researching upon it. I was like, okay, half of my village lives here. Why am I not really seeking them? When I started thinking of this whole project, my appa always used to say, talk to Shanmugarajan Tata. He is the eldest of us all.
We met
He
him,
came
no,
here.
at the work?
Yes, yes. Vellamudi Tata. That's what they would call. And then he was like, just ask him. He will know everybody's history. And that turned out to be true. He was there to tell me, like, okay, unga tata inga vandaru. He came here. That person came here. Took some 1,000 names, and then
எப்படி இவருக்கு எல்லாம் தெரியும்?
God knows. What is this memory? I have no idea. But 91 years old, right? And when I met him, also it was just 89 or something. And he continued to tell me. And in fact, meeting him made me feel like, okay, this is where I want to really begin everything. Because the excitement in his eyes and the way he was speaking to me, telling me, recalling everything, that feeling that, okay, this is important, let me tell her. I was there asking Tata, what is this? So the excitement really pushed me to start from there. And Dharavi has always been an important space for Tamil Makkal, especially the labor community. That's something that nobody really looks at either. I mean, there are studies, of course, there are labor studies. People have been studying it for like years now, but not really the Tamil community. And it's why I started. I began from there. I felt like, okay, my tata has been a mill worker. Most of my father has been like someone who started very, he had a humble beginning as well. He came here, he was repairing wires on roads and, working in hotels and soap factories. Proper labor, intensive labor. I have seen intensive labor around me all my life. And I felt like this is where I need to start. So Dharavi became such an obsession for me. All the more because when I started exploring it further, I started realizing how Tamil community has. I mean, they're one of the communities there, right? I'm sure there were so many other communities before them also there, and with them also, and they were contributing in their own ways. But because I was looking at specifically the Tamil community, my community, I started looking at things that they were doing, and that was not much known. And because I come from this, history background, I don't even call myself historian. I don't know at what point will I own that. I don't even think I can own that, because these are titles that the world can give me. I'm not going to use it for myself. But because I come from that background, I understand the importance, right? If not us, then who is going to tell our story?
Yeah.
We need to tell our stories. And it is time we should, we need to reclaim that space. Our early generations, they thought that as well. They had that mentality. This is our people, this is our land. We need to be, giving it back, doing things together. And unfortunately, after a couple of generations, maybe people got busy with their own lives, and they didn't really think it was important, and there are many other complexities involved. But I'm going the ancestral way. I am trying to kind of relook at what they saw as important. And then which is why exploring Dharavi became a huge adventure for me. And I was like, okay, this is amazing, I need to explore this more. And I didn't even think of doing a walk there. Actually, I was just trying to pick points and trying to create a map for myself and see what was important, the spaces, people, what they have been doing, record them, etc., doing interviews and stuff. But it was Aslam Sayed who runs
Go Haru Haru.
Go Haru Haru, and he was like, okay, I always wanted to do something in Dharavi, but I was not getting anybody. Let's do a walk. So that's where I began. And I didn't think much about the walk, but the first walk was a huge hit.
Yeah.
And I really wanted one thing in there was the Parai addition to it. And Jai Bhim Foundation was greatly helpful. I'm so grateful to them, actually. I really begged them, held them, like, please play the Parai, and the turnout was also great. Like, it was almost like 17-18 people. There was a whole
Yeah.
family who had come with their kids and all. It was a huge thing. Yeah. So although I didn't expect that huge turnout and it to go the way it did, but it was a turning point for me all the more, because people were amazed seeing this ecosystem, looking at this Tamil community, which feels like Ur.
Yeah.
I would post stories, and then they would be like, "Are you in Chennai? Are you in Tamil Nadu?" I'd be like, "No, I'm in Dharavi." So yeah, and there are so many stories. Like, that's why in the walk I keep talking about them, and it's very, very crucial. The neighborhood is extremely crucial. No matter how people were aversive to it, what it produced, it actually became a gold mine. That's what people keep saying. This was a kachra land and we turned it into a gold mine. That's what these elders from the community, all these tatas would say. Koi, like Pandian tata once said, यहाँ पे कुत्ता भी नहीं मुतेगा. ऐसा था. और आज देखो अडानी उसको लेके चला गया. That's what it was. So yeah, I felt like this needs to go down history.
Yeah, and there's a certain respect and like delicateness with the way that you conduct the walks as well, because like you said, you are dealing with people, you're dealing with a migrant population, a migrant Tamil population, and all of these movements of people are intrinsically tied to caste and class and religion and gender experiences.
Yeah.
How do you acknowledge all of these intersectional identities, and how can we as witnesses of the city or as witnesses of the walks experience this without exoticizing or fetishizing all these layers?
By seeing them for yourself, and speaking to the community more, right? Like, I'm sure I'm always cognizant of this fact, or like I'm just always constantly thinking if I am feeling entitled anywhere while I'm entering there, right? Or if I am by any chance misusing anything there, if I'm misusing this access, or if I am imposing myself. Like, there are many questions that I also deal with, because I don't want to do this on them either, right? Like, I'm very cognizant of that. But I feel like the complexities are crazy. I mean, where do you begin? And
tell me about some of them.
What do you talk about? So, okay, so first of all, caste, gender, all of these experiences, it's interesting. Like, you are observing that in the neighborhood, but you're also being a participant while you're observing, right? So, for example, one time I was taking Sumaya Mustafa, my friend, writer friend from Kailpatnam. She's documenting the coastal
I follow her
yeah.
on Instagram.
So, Reading TV.
Yeah, yes.
She was here, and we were going around Dharavi, and she wanted to do some research, and I was just taking her to look around the neighborhood. And one of the instances was where we wanted to speak to this catering service business, right? And we were there, right there. We just like jumped in, and we were like, "Sir, ungkitta pesa mudiyuma?" Whatever. We are being nice. We are speaking in Tamil, assuming that, if we speak in Tamil, they obviously know there's familiarity, they would be comfortable, and they would want to speak more and stuff. but you actually sense a little bit of discomfort, not little bit, a lot of discomfort from their side. And there's that they're not even looking at us. Okay, they're continuously just like looking away and not really speaking much. And I'm constantly trying to read this energy, what's happening really. We are trying to initiate this conversation, but they're not really comfortable.
Yeah.
And so we're explaining like, okay, why are we here, what Sumaya wants and stuff, but they are also limiting themselves, and they're not really letting out too much of information. And then you unfortunately, there was a point where we both felt very uncomfortable, and we felt like, okay, this is not really working. Let's just leave from here. That's when we realized, you don't really see girls like this going around speaking to men, businesses, doing this kind of work, right? So as it is for like a lot of a Tamil community, be it a Dalit community, be it an OBC or like any kind of community, for them this is a little off track. And also they are very very of like your intention.
Yeah.
They don't know who you are, where you're coming from. But there's also that angle of like, I don't know which caste this person is from, right? And so I'm not going to really involve myself a lot or let them involve into this. And this has been a constant experience with this particular caste I know they belong to. Most of these people have this kind of reaction or response. So it's very weird. Like we can't really unthink of this aspect where, okay, we are girls.
Yeah.
The gender is obviously playing its role.
Yeah.
The second thing is caste again. Like maybe they would have been more welcoming if they knew we were of the same caste or something, right? And then there was another instance where I was at this temple shrine in Dharavi only, which is established by a trans community from Salem. And I was speaking to the priestess, right? And they were just telling me about the temple, etc. And there was another woman who had come from like just the neighborhood, Tamil only. They came and they sat, and they were also trying to really trying to read me and all of that, and they're trying to have a conversation with me. Finally, they reached a point and they were like, "Emma, unga caste enama? Nee endha caste? What is your caste?" And I was a little like, taken aback. And I was like, no, the thing is, the challenge with this is also that, when you're a researcher, when you are historian, or regardless of whatever you are, when you're doing research, when you're going out there, field work and conducting interviews, you are trying to be objective at first, right? And you are trying to collect as much as data you want to, and so you have to kind of like not reveal much about yourself, unfortunately. Like I would love to be vocal about like who I am, where I come from, but the thing is, I'm always trying to think, okay, if I tell them, would there be a whole different response then? Would they keep some information? Would they not tell me about stuff more? That's always there, that kind of a expectation. So, and hence I refrain from saying it. My response was very out of reflex. I was like, I'm from Bombay, so I'm not really, I don't believe in caste. And she was like, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
She couldn't fathom.
Yeah.
And she then went on to my parents also, like, what about your parents?
In the ஊர்ல இந்த
do they not talk to you about this is very important. Jati is very important. And that really made me realize, okay, no matter where we go, this tag always comes along
everywhere.
It's something that you can't really take away from yourself. The only thing is that when a marginalized person uses their caste, their name, their community name, when they hold on to that, that's reclaiming, right? Whereas when an oppressor caste person or a Savarna person, when they hold on to their caste, it's different. It's entitlement.
Extremely different.
It's caste pride.
Yeah.
And it's not the same. I
Yeah.
keep talking about this every time.
Absolutely.
Because what Dalit or like the marginalized communities are now trying to do is reclaim the space that they were always denied. And how like most of their surnames have become such slurs, which
Yeah.
is extremely painful, right? um, and so yeah, like even today, if I have to go around for like research, I just try to take the safe side, even if I don't want to do that. So
Yeah.
I do talk about caste and my own stance, political stance, caste stance, everything, in a more intimate space where I know that okay, I can speak about this.
Yeah.
But when I am out there, where like I'm not sure of the control of who is what and how they're going to respond, and especially when I want to kind of like do some research
Yeah.
there, I want to collect some data there, I have to unfortunately keep some of these things to myself and not really reveal it. So that's what I'm talking about. Like,
Yeah.
I am an observer. I am looking at how the neighborhood is dealing with caste segregation, discrimination. There are spaces in Dharavi which has only one particular community.
Oh, really?
Yes, there is a whole area which is Tevarnagar, let's say, right? And their ways are a bit different. There is that very subtle
Yeah.
differences. They won't really talk out loud, but it's always there.
Yeah.
It's always there.
Yeah.
Very few from these kind of communities will go out of their way and help you and like be extremely like nice with you genuinely, like Hitler uncle, let's say.
I love him.
Right? He is such a sweetheart. He is, in fact, I can't even not mention this. Hitler uncle is one of the main persons who helped me explore Dharavi as well. He was the one to take me to the tannery and help me meet Ashok uncle. And we're like, okay, Pooja, this is, you do this, do this and do that. And he has been a very, very strong pillar in that sense. So that's what, like, I know that there are certain communities who have been oppressive as hell, but there are so many people from the same community who have been absolute angels, who have been enablers in so many ways. And I'm ever so grateful. And then the both sides of experiences where I see it happening, and then I am there and it's happening to me as well. And it is insane. It's a meta experience.
It is. But one thing I took away from your walk that I always keep with me is the experience of talking to all the people you introduced us to. Because as you said, the people, at least that we met, the tatas and the uncles that we met, they just love talking about, they just love being asked questions and responding and engaging with us. And so many of us are so much younger, so many of us are from different languages, different religions. It was just about telling their story, and that experience really made it it was cool. It was like listening to my grandparents talking.
Yeah, it's a very familiar experience.
Yeah. What did you learn? How long has it been that you've been doing this, and what have you learned?
Wow. So it's a year now. Literally December is
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't really, I honestly, when I started this whole project and the walk, I didn't see how far it's gonna go, right? I still don't see how far it's gonna go. For me, it's always like, I think it's personally also this thing where I cannot really over involve myself into whatever I'm doing. I create something and then somehow I just detach from it. I don't really ignore or neglect it, but then it's just that safe space where I let it grow organically and just take whatever form it wants to. So there's a bit of like, so there's always also this outsider perspective I'm also seeing into that. So yeah, Bombay Tamil history has grown quite a lot. Like now there is so much response, and I keep getting people's messages saying how this work is important, and I'm so glad that they also see that there is care taken into this. There is it's handled sensitively. It's handled with like they
A
can
lot
see
of
the
respect
yeah,
by your end.
they can see the intent. They can see exactly what I wanted to also do, because we are dealing with humans, complex humans, and especially the faction which has been, you know, literally they have been doing things without even any kind of acknowledgement, maybe without any kind of appreciation, not expecting any of that.
Yeah.
They've just been doing that, right?
Yeah.
So dealing with them is it requires a lot of empathy from our side. So yeah, like it's been a year and I feel like every single walk I do, I don't even know the count of my walks, honestly. I've lost count. I have done a lot of walks that I know, but out of all these walks I keep thinking that, you know, it's almost like a meditative process at this point, where every walk is teaching me something new. Every walk I'm discovering something new
Yeah.
that I missed probably in all the previous walks. The recent Partipal, it's been there for 10 years, 10, 15 years, but this is like, this recently is when I'm like, you know, discovering them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, this needs to be a whole experience.
Yeah.
Now I take people there to have collectively Partipal, because, and it's not just part of the experience, but it's also with this intent that let that Partipal add to their immunity, help them, you know, whoever is coming there, let it help them.
Yeah.
Let it help the person who is selling it and also the receiver,
Absolutely.
because it's so healthy.
Yeah.
I really want them to have these kind of things, experience this. I go to JP stores and I want them to, like, you know, buy stuff,
Yeah.
not because not only because it should help them, like the store, but also people.
Yeah.
They get a lot of like stuff from here. There are so many good producers here, which is from Tamil Nadu. So I'm giving them, you know, not I am not giving them, but I'm just being this medium for them to discover these things and, you know, take it for themselves as well. So I feel like it's an incredible, endless kind of like a journey, and I would really want this place to somehow just sustain.
Yeah.
And I it's not even like, you know, I don't even want them to be in the same situation.
Yeah.
I would love for it to be different. I would love for it to be a lot more better. I would love for people to have a lot more space and stuff. But it's incredible to see how without any of this, sometimes they don't even have light, natural light, within these lanes that you go, and their doors are open for ventilation because there's no ventilation, and that's not the ideal situation. But then they have managed to create what they have created and managed to live this far for generations also. And so yeah, I mean, it's an incredible journey, and not just for myself, but also witnessing them, taking people there,
Yeah.
to see how they've been there and growing and being so resilient.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
I've been reading, I mean, we've all been reading about the Tamil migrant community moving to Bombay, largely from Tirunelveli, the working class community, and how they, like you said, like they built the entire neighborhood. You took us to the tanning industry, you took us to where some of the foods are made, the Paridipal, for example. So tell me about these different industries within Dharavi. I also know that they have a printing press there in Dharavi. So
Yeah.
what are the industries that, again, like most of us don't know about, because like you said, we look at Dharavi as in a very prejudiced lens. So tell me about the work life, the industry, the labor life,
Um,
and the last tannery, I think, in Dharavi that you took
one
us
of the last,
One
I
of
would
the
say,
last, sorry.
because there are maybe two more, or like at least another tannery which is working, functioning, but it's owned by someone else. Like I'm not sure if they're Marathi, but they are, yeah, it's there. This one is owned by a Tamil person, and Dharavi's leather tannery begins with the Tamil community.
Okay.
It begins there. Yeah, that's the whole, like, that's what I keep talking about in my walk as well. Everybody credits it to Muslim Tamil community, right? And it's not just the leather industry. but you see the zari work happening there, you see garment work happening there. If you just walk in, like, you know, how we walked in, it was just one stretch that we walked into. But if you go in further in smaller chawls and areas, there are a lot more other work happening. Like there's some more other workshop happening there, right? And there are people from like different regions also, like from UP and
Yeah.
you know, different kinds of people doing so many other jobs. So there is pottery happening, right, by Kumbhar, like Kumbhar people.
Yeah.
They have been like one of the earliest people
Yes.
as well. That's one whole work that's happening. Then there is a whole recycling bit, and that entire area is intense, Saranya.
Huh.
I don't know, like, oh my god, walking there is, you start to question everything. If you go into those areas, you start questioning everything, because there is open sewage, there literally, there's like, you know, this whole filled with filthy water and shit, actual shit, right there. And just like 10 steps ahead of it, you see a rusk store where they're selling rusk and butter and everything is produced there. It's a workshop. Then you just like go ahead, and then there's some workshop where the plastic stuff are recycled. Then you walk a bit ahead, and then you see some welding happening, grill and stuff that's being made. Then you walk ahead, and then you see cardboards being produced. And so it's an ecosystem.
Yeah.
But also that ecosystem, if you walk in, I don't even know, like, it's so overwhelming when you're there, and when you see the visuals, the happenings around. There's intense work going on, but it's not happening in the best condition. Like, you go in and your breath starts getting heavy because the air is that level polluted. But there are people literally there only in this very environment. There are houses right there, who are breathing this, who are walking past this shithole, um, and open gutters everywhere. And I have also lived that life partially. My early life was that. I have seen my grandmother cleaning our gutter, and we didn't have, like, you know, access to a washroom in our own house, so having like a common toilet and waiting. So all of that is not new for me, but just going back again from a different situation in life, it felt extremely, like, existential crisis ho gaya mujhe.
Yeah.
Because you were like, how can people live here? How can people live here? But they are living here for generations, and they are producing the things that we are using. It's a huge ecosystem. Dharavi has had over 20,000 small scale industries.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's been working there. And there's like one single person who would be sitting on the road selling payasam with just one drum. That's their space, that's their business, and their father has been doing it. So it's a generational business also. And so how is it happening really? Like, that neighborhood is allowing that to happen, and they are contributing to the larger economy. And so, I mean, it's a huge ecosystem. Huge. And to see it almost on the verge of changing, or being destroyed in the guise of redevelopment and stuff, is all the more questionable.
Yeah, which is a big question that I want to come to you about. But before we go to the future of redevelopment, I want to ask you about a little more about the history. So what would you like more people to know about Tamil migration to Mumbai? Because what I know, for instance, is this really complicated history, how there was this huge movement mid 20th century, and then right after Shiv Sena was created in 67, there were anti-Tamil pogroms. There was this rise of Marathi nativism. the Matunga Tamil Brahmin hegemony over culture, and at the same time, all of this was happening in Tamil Nadu. There was Periyar's self-respect movement, the anti-caste movement in Tamil Nadu. So there's this, and also the 38-year-long Sri Lankan genocide that was happening.
Yeah.
So how do we look at this history of this particular diasporic community?
Yeah, that's a lot actually to look at and process.
Yeah.
And that's something I keep, I mean, when you're right now posing it as a question, and when you're like listing them down, is when I realize that I do touch upon all these topics when I'm conducting the walk.
Yeah, you
And-
have actually.
And somehow, very incidentally, I have spaces, I figured spaces in Dharavi that leads you to talk about this,
Huh.
right? So you do have the Periyar Chowk, let's say. It gives me an opportunity to talk about Periyar and like the whole Dravidian movement and self-respect movement and what's shaping people there and stuff like that. Then you come to this space where there's a frame of Rettai Srinivasan.
I remember that, and all of us were like, "Who's this white guy?"
Yeah, Stalin-like looking person, I call him. But yeah, he's a Parayar icon.
Yeah.
Adi Dravidar, the actual representative of that. Like, he's the first one. So from there. And then there's also some flags going on there. Vidudalai Siridagal, AIADMK.
Mm.
And so it all kind of gives me this opportunity to fully touch upon the parties,
Mm.
what they've been doing. Let's say when we talk about Vidudalai Siridagal, they were fully in support of the Elam Tamil Makkal and LTT. And so I do talk about then the whole crisis, the whole genocide. Insane,
Yeah.
right? Like I do address all of that. So to think about how Tamilans have left traces,
Yeah.
how Tamil Makkal have come here and left traces of everything that has been part of their evolution, be it polity, be it religion, and none of this is Brahmin.
Yeah.
And I want people to know that Bombay did not see influx of Brahmins till like the later or like after 1950s. You know, it's literally the labor community that came here, or like the marginalized communities that came here, because you were the kind of work that was happening here was for, was demanding people from those communities as
Yeah.
well. So unfortunately, when we talk about leather industry, when we talk about skinning of animals, unfortunately there's just like two factions. One
Yeah.
is the non-Hindu faction, which is the Muslim community that's involved in it, and the other is literally what they call a so-called Shudras, or like the lowest of the Hindu system, as they call it, right? The Dalit Makkal. They are the ones who are then doing it. And so the 19th century, when we look at the colonial period, Bombay was building up, right? Like it was becoming from just a port or like just a trading center. It was becoming much more reclaiming and
Yeah.
all of that. So ये सब construct करने के लिए you need hardworking people.
Yeah.
Intensive labor again.
Yeah.
So you needed people from different communities, and Tamil Nadu से लोग आ रहे थे because you also had parallelly famines happening there. A lot of these complexities, historical complexities, that are leading to many things, like one after the other. So the indentured labor is something. That's when people were also going out to different countries, but also different cities.
Oh, I
right?
didn't know that.
Yeah. So that's what my
Malaysia and Singapore.
yes.
Oh, okay.
So that's what my tata, my great uncle was saying, right? How Tirunelveli Makkal for employment would go either to Colombo or to Bombay. So Colombo, again, that is indentured labor. They would go there to work in the plantations and all those. And yeah, that's what, with different countries, the work also differed. So coming to Bombay was more for constructions, it was more for mills, it was more for leather industry and stuff. So what the region kind of like entailed,
Yeah.
what kind of work.
And this has been since since British times?
Yes.
Okay.
But the migration to Sri Lanka and everything from Tamil Nadu was ancient.
Okay.
We have ancient relations with Sri Lanka as a land.
Yeah.
You know, the Pandyas were there. They
Mhm.
had marital relationships with the native people there. So it's pretty different. But to Bombay, yeah, people always associate Bombay Tamils with just I keep defining or like calling us ourselves as Bombay Tamils. So most of the people think that it begins at Matunga and Chembur. Actually, it begins at Dharavi. It begins at the South Bombay area as well. It begins at many different places, and with people who were there to do labor, blue collar jobs, and which is not really acknowledged much. So that's why, yeah, I thought this was important to record their stories as well.
And what you're telling me, how you find ways very naturally, organically to talk about so many different issues, so many different time zones you travel to during your walk. It just shows me that everyday life is so loudly political, especially for Tamil people.
Yeah, it is. Cheran Tata's framework.
Yeah.
You will find all these tatas sitting there and talking polity every day.
Yeah.
Right? What is happening in Tamil Nadu? What is DMK doing? What is AIDMK?
What about the women though?
Women are also.
Yeah.
By the way, that's again very neglected aspect.
No, I mean mostly public spaces you only see men, and then you only see them chilling and having coffee.
Correct.
And women are working.
Correct.
But obviously they must have many opinions.
They do. It also differs from generation to generation with women, right? If you look at it is interesting because a lot of examples that I can draw here is from my own family and like extended family. How like my Periyamma and my mother's generation, they would not really have much opinions. Maybe they will have a very I mean, they know what's happening. They'll try to keep themselves updated and all of that. They will be like, okay, this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening and stuff like that. But again, they're not really, men don't really discuss politics with them.
Yeah.
They might crib about it out loud and like, that's the kind of things that happen. But it's not like they sit and they discuss, right? That's never happening.
Yeah.
Really. It's only like in the current generation that I see, like when I went to Jai Bhim Foundation, is when I could see this Vanita Ka also fully leading the conversation, having opinions about some leaders here and there, and talking about Vidudalai Sirudegal, isne kya kiya, usne kya kiya, all of those things. So it varies. It very much varies. Maybe they do have opinions, but they don't share, or they think maybe it's not right or something. Or maybe it's not the space for them to talk about and something like that. But my party also had a lot of opinions. Right. So I wonder how the previous generations really worked, and were there dialogues happening between them, because we did have some leaders photos when my maternal grandparents were alive, and they had their house and they had some leaders photos as well. So I'm sure there were some discussions happening, and also that was the core, right? Like 1950s and all, that was the prime of the movement and everything. So I feel like my parents' generation may have that disconnection, also because of the migration, because they've moved here. So that there's still that they want to know. Of course, there's always that constant urge to know what's happening in Tamil Nadu, keep themselves updated fully. We still have Tamil newspapers coming at home every day. My father, religiously sits and reads Tamil channels, news channels going on. They fully want to know what's happening and all. But they still have some sort of like dissociation or disconnection from there, because they, everyday life is not affecting them. That's not really affecting their life. But it was not the same for my grandparents' generation.
Of course.
Because the husband would always be affiliated to some or other party. My grandfather was a huge Anna fan.
Oh,
Arvind
okay.
Anna fan, AIADMK
Yeah.
fan. Initially, he was Periyar fan and all,
Huh.
but then he shifted.
Huh.
And then you see like how if you go to Matunga, Hitler Uncle's store, next to the store, there's this flower seller, Sami Uncle. He has MGR ka sticker there, and they would constantly keep talking about MGR and stuff.
Yeah.
Huge fan of MGR.
Yeah.
And then Hitler Uncle one day shared with me how one time in some hotel in Dharavi, the owner of the hotel was a huge MGR fan, and some other person came and he was eating and he was talking, ill about MGR. He was talking something against MGR. This owner guy goes, takes away the plate, asks him to leave. It was like, "Tere ko khana nahi milega, just leave from here." How
You're
dare
joking.
you? No, this has legit happened. Like, how dare you talk about a leader like this?
Oh my God.
So it's insane.
That's part of people's personal lives.
Personal, like that's the thing, right? Like Tamil Nadu and politics is some other level only.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some other level only, right?
Fully.
I mean, I don't really want to comment on Vijay and all, but you do see his fan base is completely different, and the kind of loyalty they show to him, and you can see the similar kind of like loyalty and intensity that these people had, like for MGR, let's
Yeah.
say, for Kamarajar, let's
Yeah.
say, and all the more because they were leaders who were building the state from nothing, right? Or like they were reclaiming the space, political space, social space from Brahmin hegemony
Yeah.
as well, because Congress was completely ruling and they were like just Brahmins
Just
everywhere. And it's Kamarajar, the only congressman they could tolerate, really. So when Periyar comes, intervenes, there's this whole revival
Yeah.
happening, right?
Yeah.
And there's also like this whole difference that you unfortunately cannot unsee, which is, how the Brahmin faction is always associating itself with a lot of Hindu stuff, right? Like the gods, the
Yeah.
mainstream,
Yeah.
the Vedas,
Yeah.
Sanskrit, and everything, right? Bharatanatyam, it's all, again, Bharatanatyam is also appropriated, we know that.
Yeah. Yeah. I just said about that.
So all of that is happening, right? But you see this whole other faction, which is the marginalized faction. If you go towards like southern Tamil Nadu, that entirety is still maybe they're worshipping the mainstream gods like Pillayar and all of that, okay, but they're not leaving their own ancestral gods either.
They're Kuladevs.
Kuladevams, Kavaldevams, Kannis, all of these gods, and they're all very indigenous
Yeah.
faiths and practices. So there is this stark difference
Yeah.
that you see in both the factions,
Yeah.
and you can see how that also reshapes the population and the spaces also around them.
Yeah, for sure. There's so much more to talk about with this. Unfortunately, for time, I just have to go to probably one of the most frustrating questions that you must be hearing all the time.
Yeah.
Dharavi being the gold mine. I can't think about Dharavi these days without thinking of redevelopment, of all of this conversation. How are the people feeling about it?
It's very mixed, to be honest. Because see, for a population that has lived there for generations now, with that small space where you have to like really crunch your own needs, right? You're living like in a matchbox sized house. You're like 5 people living in that house, 6 people living in that house sometimes. So for this faction, when you say that there's going to be towers, there's going to be buildings with proper water supply, proper electricity, proper ventilation, obviously they want that, and they deserve it also.
Yeah.
Like 100% they do. But my question is like, it goes back to frustration also goes back to this whole proving yourself worthy of this redevelopment is annoying me, because when you're asking for documents from people who have come here before even your own nation's government was formed. How are you really asking them for documents?
Yeah.
Right? What documents should they prove or show to you? But okay, fine. For like administrative purposes, etc., we need it. The the initiation should have been from government. The intervention should have been governments and not some industrialist,
Yeah.
not some yeah, I mean, like, not some entity which is already questionable in
Yeah.
so many ways, right? So that really then changes your whole perspective about redevelopment, and you don't really see any scope in there. Because some of these spaces that I've been to, I asked them about, like, okay, what's going to happen? Are they giving you space? Some of them are like, they have said that they will give space here. I'll get a space for my store here. But then there are spaces which have they're completely ambiguous. They haven't been said anything to. They don't know the money aspect. They don't know where are they going to be shifted. And so if, let's say, like, it's a space and there are 2-3 workshops within that space, and that entirety would be moved somewhere, then where are these workshops going to be? And what is going to happen to the workers?
Yeah.
Because they may be from Dharavi, right?
Yeah.
And if you move this workshop to, let's say, Deonar, then traveling becomes hard for them,
Yeah.
right? And there are some spaces where there's one workshop which in which there is a woman who comes from Kandivli, Tamil Nadu only. She works there, and imagine if this moves to Deonar, how is she going to travel
Yeah.
from Kandivli? So all of these questions are always there.
And if they redevelop some of these workshops and they're given like technologically advanced spaces, does that mean the rent will also go up?
Exactly. So if you're building a
So
tower,
it becomes
let's say,
gentrification. basically.
exactly. So maintenance is obviously high. Some may be able to afford it, some may not be able to afford it. And then what's the option? Then they will unfortunately move out and
Yeah.
see some space that is, easier for them to live in.
And that's
So,
how,
Yeah,
That's
then
just
it's a
ridiculous.
very systemic way of moving people out, uprooting them from.
slowly bougie cafe will open.
Yeah, exactly. And you have seen Dharavi. You have seen the kind of ecosystem it is, right? And how convenient it is for them to reach to the 6 stations around them. They can go walking. Where
Yeah.
if you are supposed to move them
Yeah.
from where they are exactly located
Yeah.
for all these years and like generations, how are they supposed to then adapt to what you are
And that too
doing?
in the heart of South Bombay, like to live.
It is central. It is
Central
it is
Bombay.
the heart.
Yeah.
And taking away 500 acres of land is not a joke.
Is that what they're doing?
They have 500 acres of land has been given to Adani.
Oh yeah. The whole thing is 500.
Yeah, including the salt pans. So I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's insane and it's frustrating. Some people are not happy with it. In fact, someone also thought I am a survey person, and they were almost like about to lash at me. And then I was like, "No, tour guide." And they're like, "Oh, okay." So imagine a tour guide is accepted there. They're super chill with them, right? Because unfortunately, there's also slum tourism going.
Yeah, all the whitewashing tourism
Yeah.
must be there.
And that's also from government only. So
Oh really?
yes, you have slum as tourism, poverty porn happening. So, but still, okay, if it is benefiting girls and like children from the community, I think I'm not sure. Like I shouldn't be commenting on that. If it is helping them, it is helping them. But then people are very off these surveyors.
Yeah.
Coming and troubling them almost. It seemed like.
Obviously, definitely.
So some of it, like, it looks like okay, they're not happy. Some bit feels like okay, they're fine with it as long as they're getting what they need. I had interviewed Sudhir Rajbar one time, and
the artist.
Yeah, the Chamar Studio artist. So they were saying that only, like it's what is redevelopment really? who is it developing,
Hmm.
and what is development.
Hmm.
If you have these artisans or like mochis living around, if you're building them an incubator or something, then I understand. If you're helping them grow their businesses and give them space, give them all the support required, that is understandable, that is development. ये सिर्फ fancy buildings बनाने से development नहीं होता है.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, unfortunately, in this nation don't understand that concept only.
Hmm.
It's not building bridges or like
Yeah.
statues or buildings is not development. Hello. It's much more than that.
Yeah.
It's sustaining and preserving the ecosystem there is already.
Yeah.
Like you have the mangroves which you are conveniently, taking away, wiping off to build I don't know what. Like what? It's insane. And the redevelopment has always been there. Like
For years, it's been a debate.
happening
Yeah.
only. It's not that this government. It's been many
Yeah.
governments, and it's always going to be a complex thing also. But which is why you really need community people to be
Hmm.
part of it.
Yeah.
It's not aloof. It's literally their land.
Yeah.
How are you taking
It's their
away
homes
land?
and their
Yeah,
lives.
Yeah, and their land mainly. How are you able to take away from their land, put them in these cubes in a fancy building? It could be on like 31st floor or something, but then it's not as convenient as being on the land that they are on and have a shop next door
Hmm.
for themselves. It's not that again. So what is it really then? How
Yeah.
is it benefiting them? Those are the questions. Yeah, I mean, we need to think of and reconsider, but who is doing that for
Yeah.
us?
I mean, you are one of the people who is doing that, which is why I think the work you're doing is, yeah, you're being very humble and very modest. But I can brag about you because I genuinely have so much respect for what you do, because we speak to people with your walks and with your research, and that is the most important thing.
Thank you.
Which brings me to my last question, which is what is your future plans for Bombay Tamil History? What do you see this growing into?
Uh, Bombay Tamil History may be an archive space, either digital or physical or in any capacity. It's already in the building, a digital space we are creating already, and it's in the making. It's gonna be a space where communities can come together, can collaborate, can speak their hearts out, can celebrate, can actually grieve together as well.
Yeah.
I do want to. Yeah, it's a space, and when I say space, it's not a physical space at all.
Hmm.
It's a space. It's like vastness. So you have immense potential here. Go crazy with it.
I love
Do
that.
whatever you want with this space. Is what I kind of like look at it like, and it's not just limiting to Bombay Tamil community either, right? It's beyond Bombay Tamil community. Tamil is the unifying factor here.
Yeah.
And at one point, it's not even just Tamil. It's also like migrants. It's migration. It's labor, and all of it is an identity in itself. So with all those identities, I would love to explore all those identities in many ways, and it doesn't have to be from the Tamil region itself. Of course, that's like right now what I'm looking at, but it can grow more than that, beyond that. So all kinds of identities are welcome here. It's a space where we can grow together, experience things together, even including like the diaspora.
Yeah.
That's something I want to build the space along with the diaspora, and share these memories together, ongoing activities, kind of go back in time and bring back the ancestral ways. That's literally what I'm aiming for, and broadcasting.
Yeah. No, that's really beautiful, Pooja, because we are a city of migrants,
Yeah.
and it's something that's so easily erased or removed or just forgotten about. So I am so grateful for the work that you're doing.
Thank
you so much. Those are all my questions, but thank you so much.
Thank
You deserve another coffee.